Sometimes I sit here, and I just can't believe the things people think they're entitled to. The sheer, audacious nerve of some individuals is just mind-boggling. I'm talking about a situation that completely tore my life apart, rebuilt it, and then tore apart the lives of others, and honestly, I still don't know if I'm the villain or the hero. The simple truth is, I kicked my own stepchildren out of the house, a house I owned, and I did it completely legally, serving them what they themselves had named me, Plan B eviction. Now, before you jump to conclusions and call me an awful monster, a heartless stepfather, you need to hear the whole story, every single degrading, hurtful, and frankly, infuriating detail. So tell me, right here and now, was I wrong for what I did, or was this the only way to finally regain my dignity and my home? Let me take you back to how this mess even started. I met my wife, Sarah, about 7 years ago. I was divorced, well established in my career as a financial consultant, and owned a beautiful, fully paid off home in a great neighborhood. The house we're talking about. Sarah was also divorced, and had 2 children from her first marriage, Mark, who was 16 at the time, and Emily, who was 14. Her ex-husband, their biological father, was completely out of the picture, literally. He moved across the country and barely sent child support, and definitely never visited. Sarah painted a picture of a tight, knit, loving family unit that was just looking for a new chapter, a stable male influence. I, being a bit lonely and genuinely falling for Sarah, was more than happy to step up. I saw it as a chance to have the family I always wanted. We dated for a year and then got married. Everything was a little rushed, I'll admit, but I truly thought we were building something genuine. The moment they moved into my house, the dynamic shifted. It wasn't our house. It became their house that I happened to pay for. The children, Mark and Emily, were polite for the first few weeks, maybe the first month. But once they realized I wasn't going anywhere, the true nature of their resentment and entitlement started to surface. It began with small things. Ignoring me when I spoke, leaving their massive messes everywhere and expecting me to clean it up, or outright demanding things that were well beyond my budget. But it escalated quickly. Any attempt I made to parent, to instill any sense of discipline or responsibility, was immediately met with hostility and Sarah's defense. "They've been through enough, honey," she'd say. "Don't stress them out. Just let it go." So I'd let it go, and the kids learned that they had a free pass. The financial burden was enormous. Not only was I covering 100% of the mortgage, utilities, and household expenses, but I was also paying for their private school tuition, their clothes, their phones, and their extracurricular activities. I even bought Emily a car when she turned 17. Sarah contributed nothing financially. She worked part-time, and her entire paycheck, she claimed, went toward her personal needs, meaning I was the sole provider for a family of 4, including 2 teenagers who acted like spoiled royalty. I tried to talk to Sarah about shared finances, about the kids' disrespect, but she always shut me down. "You make more than enough," she'd argue. "If you loved us, you wouldn't be counting pennies." I realized I was less of a husband and father, and more of a walking, talking ATM. The real tipping point, the insult that started this whole terrible process, was the nickname. It happened at dinner one night. We were talking about family vacations, and I suggested a budget-friendly trip to a national park, something fun and outdoorsy. Mark, now 19 and in his first year of college, that I was paying for obviously, rolled his eyes so hard I thought they'd get stuck. He scoffed and said, "A park? Seriously, Dad would have taken us to Europe. God, Plan B Dad is so boring." Emily snickered. Sarah just gave me that look, the one that meant, let it go. I felt a cold shock travel through me. Plan B Dad. It wasn't just a dig at my vacation idea. It was a complete dismissal of my identity and my role in the family. It meant I was the consolation prize, the guy who showed up, because their real dad bailed. I confronted them, keeping my voice low but firm, and said, "What did you just call me?" Mark, emboldened, said, "It's just a joke, Plan B Dad. You're the fallback guy." Sarah finally stepped in, not to defend me, but to scold me for making a scene. That night, I didn't sleep. That insult, Plan B Dad, became the soundtrack to my life. For the next 2 years, the name stuck. They whispered it behind my back, used it in texts, and eventually just started saying it to my face. Plan B, Dad? Can you buy me this? Plan B, Dad. Stop trying to make rules. Sarah never corrected them. She even started using variations of it, referring to me as her second chance husband to her friends, which was just another way of saying I was second best. The disrespect was a constant, suffocating cloud. My once peaceful, beautiful home was filled with contempt. I was miserable, resentful, and felt completely alone. I began seeking therapy because the stress was genuinely making me ill. My therapist helped me see what I was desperately trying to ignore. I wasn't in a marriage. I was in a transactional relationship where I was the primary financier and the punching bag. The final, absolute straw came when I had to have unexpected surgery, a hernia repair. It was a simple procedure, but I was out of commission for a week, confined to the sofa and unable to lift anything over 5 pounds. I asked Sarah and the kids to pitch in with chores, maybe just clean up after themselves and do their own laundry. Sarah acted like I had asked her to run a marathon. The children did absolutely nothing. For 5 days, I watched as my house turned into a biohazard. Dirty dishes piled high, laundry overflowed, and my wife sat on her phone, scrolling, occasionally bringing me a generic cup of tea. When I finally called Mark and Emily into the living room, and in a soft, pained voice asked them why they couldn't help their injured stepfather, Mark looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's not my job, Plan B, Dad. That's what you pay Mom for, isn't it?" That's when something broke inside me. Not just my spirit, but the delusion that this was fixable. I realized they didn't see me as family, a husband, or a father figure. They saw me as a resource to be exploited until it ran dry. So, I stopped arguing. I stopped trying. I just started planning. I called my lawyer the very next day, a trusted friend, and asked him to prepare divorce papers, and not just any divorce papers. I wanted a clean, fast separation, and I wanted them out of my house. So that's the situation I was in, completely broken down, lying on my couch, being verbally abused by the people whose lives I was bankrolling, and my wife was enabling it. I had reached a decision point, a moment where I had to choose between my own sanity and the fast aid of a family. Before I tell you about the move I made, the legal maneuver that ended everything, I want you to pause right here and comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have stayed, tried to fix it? Or would you have packed their bags for them? I truly want to know if I was an outlier here. Alright, let's get to the climax. The moment I finally took back control, my lawyer was meticulous. Since I owned the house outright before the marriage, and we had a pre-nuptial agreement. Thank God for my cautious lawyer. The house was entirely my separate property. However, in our state, the kids, even though they were adults, Mark was 21, Emily was 19, both still living at home and going to college, had a right to residency as long as the marriage was ongoing. The key was the divorce. My lawyer advised me to file immediately and serve Sarah with the divorce papers. But I wanted the eviction to be a surprise, a definitive statement. The day the papers were served, I was at work. I had arranged for a process server to deliver the divorce petition to Sarah, and a separate, very official-looking document to Mark and Emily. That second document was a notice to quit, a formal, legal eviction notice. Since they were adults living in my house without a lease, they were considered month-to-month tenants at will, even though they weren't paying rent. The law in my state requires a specific 30-day notice for the termination of a tenancy at will. My lawyer made sure every single letter of the law was followed. When I got home that evening, the house was a war zone. Sarah was hysterical, shouting on the phone to her sister. Mark and Emily were standing in the living room, faces white with shock, holding the eviction notices. Mark was the first to confront me, his voice shaking with a fury I'd never heard. "What is this, Plan B, Dad? You can't do this! Where are we supposed to go?" Emily chimed in, tears streaming down her face. "You're throwing us out on the street! This is illegal." I walked past them, calm as a lake on a windless day, and went straight to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, turned around, and faced the three of them. "It is not illegal, Mark," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "It is entirely legal. I own this house. You are adults. You have been served a valid 30-day notice to vacate the premises. You need to secure new housing. Your residency here terminates exactly 30 days from today. Sarah finally shrieked, "You can't divorce me! You can't kick out my kids!" What about your family? What about love? I looked at her, and the years of bitterness finally came pouring out, but in a quiet, devastating tone. There is no family here, Sarah. There hasn't been for years. There has only been a financial arrangement that involved me paying for a home where I was ridiculed, disrespected, and nicknamed Plan B Dad. Well, guess what? Plan B is now in effect. This is your Plan B eviction. You can go back to Plan A, or whatever you choose, in 30 days. The next 4 weeks were pure, unadulterated hell. Sarah tried everything, crying, begging, threatening, and then trying to get romantic. I stayed in the guest room and didn't budge. The kids went from furious to desperate. They tried to appeal to my fatherly side, suddenly calling me by my first name and saying things like, "We're so sorry, we were just being silly, we didn't mean it." But it was too late. The damage was done, and my resolve was ironclad. They had their biological father, the one they cherished, even though he was absent. They could call him. They could figure it out. When the 30 days were up, my lawyer had arranged for a small security detail, just 2 quiet men to be present. I had packed up all of Sarah's clothes and the kids' personal belongings and had them stored neatly in a climate-controlled unit that I paid for 1 month of. On the final day, Mark and Emily were still scrambling. They genuinely thought I was bluffing until the security guards calmly started changing the locks. Sarah had found a place to stay with her sister, but Mark and Emily hadn't secured a single thing. They stood there, utterly helpless, watching their futures crumble. The last words Mark said to me were, "You're a cruel, pathetic man." My only reply was, "I am a man who finally respects himself." The aftermath was exactly what I needed. The divorce was finalized quickly. Because of the clear prenup and the separation of assets, Sarah got very little, thankfully. She and the kids ended up moving in with her sister, and the last I heard, the kids had to defer their college semesters because they couldn't afford the living expenses without my financial support, and had to get minimum wage jobs. It sounds harsh, I know, but they were adults who had to face the very real consequences of their entitlement and cruelty. My life, however, became peaceful again. My house felt like a home, my sanctuary. I had space, quiet, and my financial situation stabilized immediately. The peace was worth every bit of the initial pain. So that's the whole, ugly truth. It was a brutal move, a cold move, but it was a move of survival. It was my final, ultimate answer to being called Plan B Dad. The moral of this story is simply, do not let people confuse your kindness for weakness. Because when a kind person finally breaks, the result is catastrophic for those who took advantage of them. If you've ever felt invisible or taken for granted in your own life, you know exactly how I felt and why I had to do this. Like this video if you were on my side in this whole mess. And if you think I went too far, I want to hear your argument down below. So please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this from the dark corners of Reddit. I'll see you all in the next story.